Hello and welcome to Think Like a Game Designer. I'm your host, Justin Gary. In this podcast, I'll be having conversations with brilliant game designers from across the industry with a goal of finding universal principles that anyone can apply in their creative life. You could find episodes and more at thinklikeagamedesigner.com.
All right, before we get to today's episode, I want to highlight something I'm really excited about. And that is our upcoming Kickstarter for Ascension Tactics Inferno. For those that don't know, Ascension Tactics, we ran a huge Kickstarter for it back in 2020. Thanks to all the fun of the pandemic, we had to take a little while before we were able to deliver that to retail, but we finally got the game into retail in 2022. It's won a bunch of awards. People have been super excited about it. It's been in a lot of top 10 lists for the year. I'm super passionate about it. If you want to learn more about that, you could actually listen to my previous episode with Ryan Sutherland. We talked about it in detail. But Ascension Tactics Inferno is a new standalone expansion coming that has all of the fun of deck building games, all of the badass miniatures and tactical excitement of a tactical battling game, and over 50 new miniatures, maybe even more depending upon how well the Kickstarter goes. An entirely new center deck of cards, having a new terrain, new story, new campaign. You can play it competitively in 1v1, 1v2, 2v2. You can also play it solo or cooperatively. We have a new mode that lets you play cooperatively with up to 4 players, playing through a campaign, an all new storyline, all kinds of fun stuff. It takes all the cool characters of the Ascension brand, takes it to another level. It's something I'm so excited about, and I'm sure I'll talk more about it and dig into some more of the design lessons and insights in a future episode. But I just wanted to give you, my podcast audience, a teaser. We're going to have a exclusive day one reward for everybody that backs the project on day one. We'll tell you more about that. But if you want to make sure you find out what happens, you can go to stoneblade.com. That's STONEBLADE.com. If you've been listening to me for a while and you don't know how to spell that, then I've probably done a pretty poor job here, but that's okay. We're sharing it anyway. You can click on the links there. They'll take you to be following the Kickstarter. Join our mailing list. You'll be the first ones to hear it. I'm going to get us back to the lessons and the insights here, but if you want to see how I do this work, right, following along with the Kickstarters, you can see how I build the marketing campaigns. You can see how we design, what it's like to design an expansion for a game like this. There's lots of cool insights you can get by following along, whether you back or not. And of course, I always appreciate it if you back and share, but I just am so excited about it. I want to share that enthusiasm with you all. So stay tuned for more information and go to stoneblade.com to find out more in the short term. And now let's get to today's guest. In today's episode, I speak with Matt Fantastic. Matt is one of the most interesting and fun people that I ever get to see at game conventions. He and I always have awesome chats. He is really the epitome of the kind of indie mindset. And I will tell you just at first as a warning, there's a lot of foul language in this episode. Matt does not censor himself, and I didn't think it was appropriate to censor him. And frankly, talking to him made me censor myself less. So if that's not your cup of tea, then maybe this is an episode to skip. But if you're willing to get past that, there is a ton of great insights here. Matt is most known probably as the creative director of Forever Stoked Creative, where he is able to build a team that has no real official leaders and is a collective, both in making group decisions and in the financial rewards. But he talks about the distinctions between that and having clear creative leads for a project and how you balance those two things. His games have crazy, ridiculous titles like Everyone Else Thinks This Game is Awesome, Glamazon's The Curse of the Chainmail Bikini, and more. But don't let this indie punk style fool you. Matt has also been a consultant and worked on games for the Marvel brand, for Netflix, for Yale, and for a variety of other really high-end institutions and projects. Matt is a quintessential independent and creative, and this episode, in addition to the game design and game industry insights, is going to give you a lot of philosophical insights. And we rant about that stuff for quite a bit. And so there's a lot of really great things about what it means to be a creative, what it means to be an indie, how you should think about your work and life, and how all of these things come together. We talk about Matt's music career and his singing and his all of the other creative fields that he's been involved in, publishing books and vinyl records and all the weirdnesses that come with that. So it's a really fun episode. I really enjoyed it. I like to bring you a lot of distinct, unique voices that show you the range of possibilities to live a creative life and make a living as a creative. And Matt Fantastic is absolutely one of those voices. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And without further ado, here is Matt Fantastic. Hello and welcome. I am here with Matt Fantastic. Matt, it's fantastic to have you here.
It is fantastic to be here.
Yeah, man. So you and I have been friends for many years. We see each other at conventions. I'm pretty sure you're just at every convention. It doesn't matter where, when, how. I feel like I've seen you at every single one. And
I try.
Yeah. It's clear there's an incredible work ethic, but also this deep punk rock indie ethos that you just exude in everything that you do. You break so many of the conventions and norms and the expectations, and yet you have a deep creative wellspring that I'm really excited to tap into here. Like you and I, we chat all the time, but we've never gotten to really dive deep into your background and pull out some of these lessons. So I'm very excited to kind of get this ball rolling.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for saying that. I think there's so many things to unpack in what you just said that are interesting. One is the grind, which I think we can get to, a little further on. But the punk rock thing I think is something that has defined my career in the game industry in a lot of ways, right? And that I came up in kind of the DIY punk and hardcore and indie scene. I played in bands and toured and did a label, and I booked lots of shows. We used to book shows at my mom's house in the basement and I'd book like the Knitting Factory in New York, and then I'd be like, okay, do you want to play my mom's basement though?
That is amazing. So your mom was clearly supportive in this, or it sounds like, or else she was really mad. I don't know which way this went down.
Yeah, so we lived with my mom and my grandparents, and they were just very cool and supportive. Yeah, my mom especially got sort of like DIY punk and the vibe and attitude and energy of the community side of it, like really, really well, right?
So I just want to unpack that a little bit, because DIY punk sounds really cool, and then from knowing you, I can pick up what that is, and I have my own ideas of what that is. If you had to define that to someone who'd never heard that phrase before or understood that term before, how would you define it?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, I think it falls under I think the DIY is the aspect that's interesting, right? Because we could sit here and spend 40 hours doing a podcast about what is and isn't, quote unquote punk. But I think it's less a music and more of an energy and attitude. And I don't mean like an attitude like the Queen, whatever. That was terrible. But more,
this is some great audio we're getting here. I love it.
But it's more of an emphasis on the DIY aspect, right? Which stands for do it yourself. And it was an attitude that really came forward more in the early 80s than in that kind of like earlier years of punk, although there was a lot of it then as well. But this idea of, we are outside the mainstream and we are going to do our own thing, and we're going to do it the way that we want to do it. And, record label doesn't want to put out this music, fine. These clubs don't want to, book our bands. Great. We'll start our own spaces.
Yeah. So that ethos clearly is something that's powerful and carries on. And as you sort of the story you already told about this, okay, we're going to create our own label. We're going to host shows in mom's basement. We're going to bring in these different acts. And so that idea of whatever it is, we're going to do it ourselves and we're going to figure it out. Clearly, that's a powerful ethos to carry over into any whatever creative thing you're going to do, right? This what I would call an action bias, right? I'm not going to wait for permission. I'm not going to wait for a gatekeeper. I'm going to just start doing whatever it is that I can do and figure it out as I go along.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because, like, talking about this stuff in, sort of my adolescence and, sort of like young adulthood career doing stuff. It's so normal, right? Like, it's so normalized. It's so just like, of course you have a label. Like, everybody has a label, right? And you'd go to a show and there'd be like 5 different people with distros, like, set up with, a bunch of records that they'd traded with other bands and, and all this and that. And then you move into games, and it's interesting because I feel like way back there was a lot of that sort of ethos around the same time frame, of the kind of, like, yeah, we're making these weird games. It comes in a Ziploc bag, right? Awful Green Thing from Outer Space, Steve Jackson game from the 80s came in a, VHS, case and stuff like that. So I think it's interesting that there was actually a lot of it in sort of the earlier days of games. And
yeah,
when I was a kid, I would see that stuff, and didn't really make the connection until I was a little bit older, right? Because games are definitely much more commodified, as an overall thing. It's really interesting to get into what is and isn't in indie games. If you'd like to go down that road, I have lots of opinions.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because it is something that it's a term that gets thrown around, and much like punk, I suppose you could find a lot of different ways to define it and argue who is and who isn't indie. But do you have a specific definition in mind? Since you bring it up, what's that differentiator?
Well, it's less that I have a definition of what it is, but more that I think it is really interesting when we talk about it in games. Because in a lot of ways, and I think this might be true in a lot of things outside of games, but games is really where I have the most experience, games and music. Indie and music is kind of, I don't want to say lifestyle, but it's a broader thing. It's an ethos. It's an attitude. It's a scene that you might be a part of, or various scenes that you might be a part of. Just because you're not, so I talk a lot about, so if you think about music, right, there's bar bands, right? Bar bands are not indie bands, right? They and no negative thing towards bar bands, but they're like playing covers. They're maybe playing a few originals. They can, some of the most talented musicians, but they're just doing their thing, right? They're just not particularly successful, or they're not particularly interested in pushing. In a lot of cases, they're just not really interested in pushing themselves into the things that you need to do to kind of like grind it out to try to make a career. Whereas in games, indie is almost interchangeable with not successful. And I say that not in or I guess defining success is a complicated thing, right? But let's say not as successful as someone would like to be typically. In a lot of cases, it's, oh no, we're like an indie company. And it's like, no, you're just a small company that aspires to be a bigger company, but you're doing the same kind of stuff, right? Like you're making a family, strategy game that you aspire to have on the shelves in Target. Right. And is that, or is that not indie? Like, I don't know. I don't want to try to pretend like I'm some sort of arbiter of what is and isn't various things, but it is interesting the dramatically different way I think we use the term and talk about sort of like the indie game scene in games.
Yeah. So there's a couple threads that are interesting to pull apart there, right? So there's one, there seems to be a certain threshold of success beyond which you can't call yourself indie anymore. And I don't know what, obviously that threshold is fuzzy, but there's a certain degree of mainstream adoption to which there's a clear barrier of indie, not indie. And then it sounds like you're pulling another thread here, which is this attitudinal approach towards, I'm doing things that maybe are not intended specifically towards this growth and this mass adoption. They're intended towards appealing to a smaller audience or to my own aesthetic instincts, more so than trying to do the thing that you think is going to be the most successful or the thing that will allow you to grow the most, right? There's this sort of approach of almost, it's just is a pretentious way to say it, but like almost a kind of creative authenticity or a niche market focus over a kind of mass market growth focus. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think niche market. I think niche market is a great way to put it that doesn't sound very pretentious. For example, I primarily sing in hardcore bands is typically what I would do. I'll plug the most recent record we put out a couple years ago, Savage World. We're not popular, that particular band, but it is up on I Gave You My Worst is the name of the record. The band's Savage World. It's up on all the major streaming platforms and all that. I sing in that band. And I don't know if your podcast is such where you play a clip very briefly so you can see what singing actually means. But
if you've got a short clip to play, it's we do whatever we want. So we'll listen to it.
Well, so great. So that is clearly not something that we are aiming to be on the radio with, right? And that's not to say that we're success averse, right? I mean, I can talk about that and the years of, am I too punk to do X, Y, or Z when I was much younger? But, at this point, it's definitely not a success averse thing, but it's just, well, the music that we're making, the stuff that we're doing, the stuff that we're sort of being inspired by and aspire to is not something that the mainstream is going to be interested in, like, at all, right? And it's not that we're too cool. It's not that we're anything. It's, no value judgment at all, but it's just not something that people want to listen to.
Well, I want to highlight something that you just said there, because I think it's really important, right? Because sometimes indie is a shield to protect your ego, right? The idea that I'm not successful. It's not because I can't be successful. It's because I'm indie. There's this like attitude of like you protect your ego by saying, no, well, I'm this kind of person, and therefore I'm not willing to do the things that would lead to success. I'm not willing to put myself out there and protect my ego because, they just don't get it. They just don't get me, or I'm this, I think there's an important distinction there that sometimes it can be a trap, that to say, okay, no, I'm going to serve this niche audience, and these are the people for whom, their judgment matters, and I'm going to be able to take feedback and iterate, which is like the core of the creative process in many ways. That is a different thing than saying, okay, well, I'm indie, therefore I don't need to follow these basic business practices. I don't need to, I can just ignore your feedback. Whereas, yeah, of course you can ignore people who are not a part of the audience you're trying to serve, but you need to figure out who it is that you're trying to serve and make sure that you are, growing and putting yourself out there for that. Like, I think it's a really important and subtle point that you can be punk rock and indie and all of those things, but you could also be using those things to hide the necessary hard work of putting your creative work out there, feeling it get criticized, realizing you need to improve, and continuing on that path.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think, thinking about the music thing, I just assume that 98% of human beings are like, well, this sucks. So in terms of putting yourself out there, right, and accepting criticism, and I'm not saying people are even being jerks about it necessarily. I mean, there are people are jerks, but even just more in the sense of this isn't for you, right? Somebody. There's some games that I look at and I'm like, yeah, this isn't for everybody, right? Dungeon Degenerates that Gablenko puts out. Sean is incredibly talented, does really cool stuff. Another sort of punk rock weirdo, super, super cool. Nate Hayden did Cave Evil and Mushroom Eaters and stuff like that. And those are things that, you show it to the typical family that's buying Ticket to Ride or whatever. They're going to be like, what is wrong with you? You think I would be interested in this?
Yeah, well, and so I'm not familiar with those games, so I'm happy if we want to pick apart some of those specifically, or to kind of use this as a segue back into your career in the game industry, because you've clearly selected a lot of these projects, and I see you hawking things like Shitty Werewolf, and it's like, okay, well, that I would never have thought to put that product out there, but it's awesome, and it's draws people in, and it has its own charms. What led you down this path? You mentioned these other games that you saw growing up, or the kind of cheap ass game style things. I don't know how this career path for you.
Yeah, I mean, James Ernest is another very sort of inspirational, cheap ass stuff. Is definitely somebody that I looked at and was like, man, this is great. I love this energy, this attitude, just the approach. I mean, for me, it's funny because a lot of people, even good friends, see a more limited side of the work that I do. Or because it is the work that's the most out there, people think about it the most, right? So Shitty Werewolf, I just had this funny joke vision and wanted to make this goofy thing and did, and then it turned out to be way more successful than I thought it was going to be. I mean, still not make a career successful or anything, but I legitimately thought I was going to sell 50 copies or something to my friends that think it's funny. And so I do projects like that where I have this kind of like artistic vision or whatever you want to call it. I mean, artistic is maybe stretching the term, but just kind of have this vision of what it is that I want to do. But then at the same time, like I'm working on projects with Disney. I'm consulting with Netflix on, some of the stuff that they've been doing with interactive media. I am, working on a lot of big licensed stuff in general. The studio does a bunch of work with Marvel. So we are, I'm kind of all over the place, right? I mean, I think what's really exciting to me personally about where I am in my career is that I have gotten to the place that I'm in, being entirely myself, doing work that interests me, and am at a point where my body of work, my experience, my whatever connections, etc., have reached a point where I can, make Shitty Werewolf and then also, give a copy to, people at my meeting with Hasbro or Mattel or whatever to talk about stuff.
Right. And so I know those parts, disparate parts of your career and your work, but I don't know how to connect those dots. So I really want to know that. And I'm sure now we've intrigued enough of our audience, both as to what the hell is Shitty Werewolf, also as to how someone can make both that and be making games for Disney. Right. Let's just dig into the story a little bit. Like talk about how you want to go from, punk rock in your basement to consulting for Disney.
Yeah, well, so I mean, like I grew up in a gaming family, which is a huge advantage, I guess. And it was a big deal when I got to join the family D&D game that my uncle DM'd when I was a little kid. And so I've been playing D&D since the mid '80s. And we of course played classic mass market games growing up, but also had stuff that we had like the TSR kids board games and stuff. We had, deeper cut, my poor mother, was the, what is it called? The Overlord, it's not called Dungeon Master in Hero Quest. She had to,
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
To be the DM in a lot of Hero Quest, in between D&D games, right? And so, so games was a big thing for me growing up. I remember getting the first Final Fantasy for the NES blew my mind because I could play D&D without everybody else having to be there, right? I could do fantasy adventures, and so. Just being a fan of games was a thing since, basically as long as I could remember. And so, so I was in a gaming family, and, you're a fan, you start going to local conventions or, you hear about stuff and you're just intrigued. I remember, so the first person I met in the industry was Kurt Covert, who owns Smirk and Dagger Games.
Mm-hmm.
Just put out Boop is like his big hit right now. And he had he had designed like his first game basically. And he was play testing it at this local convention that there were like maybe 100 people at or something, and so he's local. And, I met him and he was like, I'm a game designer. And I was like, my mind was blown that I don't know, it's one of these things that you don't really think about, the people that make the stuff, right? Somebody makes games, and now we know that, but at the time it was a very oh, this guy just makes games, I guess, sure. Once I started looking at it, there was a really obvious analog to that kind of DIY punk, like indie sort of yeah, we're just going to make stuff. Why? I don't know, because I want to make it, right? And that's kind of been from there, it's been that through line of, well, I want to make stuff, and some of it is aligned with what may or may not be more commercially successful, and some of it isn't. But I think for me, what drives me is doing interesting stuff, things that intrigue me, things that I find some interesting angle at, right? I mean, I think for me, it's not a question of my I definitely have those kind of artistic vision things, but for me, solving a problem of how do I make a game that hits this spec that, whatever client is interested in is a really interesting problem to solve creatively as well. Right. So, I'm I find interesting problems, right? Every game has an interesting thing, because I think we're trying to do something so big and weird and complicated when we approach a design, right?
Right. Well, yeah, you're trying to craft an experience for your players, right, for your audience, and then you're working in a variety of interesting, different constraints every time, right? Obviously, a constraint of I need this to be, including Disney characters and fit in a $40 retail box versus okay, I really want to make something that I can draw by hand, right? Very different constraints, and both provide interesting new opportunities and challenges, right? Constraints breed creativity, and so what I hear from you is this basics of, okay, you're following things you're passionate about and you have a core DIY ethic and ethos. And then, the sort of subtle but relatively common point of, hey, you just showed up at a convention, right? You surrounded yourself with the people that do the thing that you love, right? I'm sure you went to a music concert before you started performing, and you went to a game convention before you started designing games. And so this is one of the easy little hacks for people, right? To go where the people are that do the things you love to do, and you'll find more ways to get involved and make that more career option, whatever path it goes.
Yeah, I mean, one of my really brief little bits of advice that I just tell everybody is that, ultimately so much comes down to luck, right? It's luck at the end of the day, but hard work is how you create the most opportunities for that luck to happen, right? You mentioned that I go to all these conventions, and a huge part of my career, especially early days, I think was built on just being there, right? Was showing up, working at a booth, showing up early, being one of the first people there, helping, move boxes, being one of the last people there, helping load the truck, and just, being around, being open to talking to people, to meeting people. And, I was my peak year, I did 236 days on the road for conventions. And it was nuts. And I'm glad I don't do that anymore. But I mean, I made so many, chance encounters turned into things. But I also think at the same time, I am genuinely interested in talking to people and meeting people and hearing them talk about stuff they're passionate about and just kind of being around that stuff. And so I think, for me, it was also more successful because I didn't come into conversations looking for a transactional kind of like, well, where can you get me? Right. What can you do for me? It was more,
right.
Well, I'm going to be here and I'm going to talk to people. And then after talking to somebody for an hour, I'm going to realize, oh shit, like you're that guy. Like, oh man, cool.
Yeah. That's a key distinction point between, quote unquote networking and the, putting yourself in environments and adding value to the communities you care about and finding who you genuinely connect with and the projects that genuinely interest you and where your curiosity takes you. Like very, very important distinction. You could see two people in the same room that look like they're doing the same thing, and it's actually a very different experience when one is transactional and the other is genuine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think for me, in the game industry, I love games, right? Like, I mean, I genuinely I love games. I joke that my primary hobby is doing a weird version of my day job. So like Shitty Werewolf, I look at Shitty Werewolf as just like a fun hobby kind of thing, right? Like, and what do we do on days? Well, we play games on days off, right? Like I love games. And so being around people that are also passionate about games, it just is a natural, way to have these conversations and to connect with people. And, other people are generally there because they love games, right? I really, really hate the there's no money in games energy that some people like to bring. I think that's just absolutely false, like just at the face of it, and also just very self-defeating and similar to like what you were saying about, oh, we're indie, so we're not successful. And it's like, no, there's lots of money in games. Just because you didn't make it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? And if you're saying, oh, well, there's no money, so then your lack of financial success, at least, isn't your fault. It's the fault of the industry or whatever. But I lost where I was going with that. Money.
Oh, that's okay, because I actually think this is a really fun connection point, or important connection point between the two things that you just said, right? So there's this idea of you can't control, like, luck. Luck is a part of it for sure. Every story, somebody has a break or meets somebody key, or like every story, and there's something that happens there. But that your hard work can get you more opportunities, right? You put yourself out there and have more opportunities for luck to hit you, and then you talk about the attitude shift between there's not money in games, or the one we talked about earlier where it's okay, I'm Indy, so of course I'm not successful. That the ego shift of saying, yes, of course that there's luck involved. Of course the work is hard to do well, but I still am going to behave with the attitude that I have control over my fate, that I have things I can do to make this better or worse. Like my own, just to tangent to a brief story of my own, right? I started in the game industry as a pro Magic player, right? I started playing competitively and got into that world. And I will tell you that the key distinction there, the number of times I've lost games because I got unlucky, or he drew the card he needed, or I lost the card, whatever, right? Countless. But I and all the other people I know that were successful took the attitude of, they didn't look at the bad beat, the bad break, the bad whatever. They looked for, okay, what could I have done differently? How could I approach this in the next time so that that bad thing couldn't happen to me, or that I could learn from it and be able to react to it better? And that is the thing I credit the most with my success in the industry. And I think it's a similar narrative and throughput for you. Like, you're going to figure it out. You're going to take the next step. You're going to do it yourself. And whatever it takes, you're going to keep moving. That, I think, is a really important distinction. That's almost a contradiction, right? The accepting that luck is involved and that you don't have control over the outcome, but behaving as though you do and approaching every situation like that is a really powerful frame.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is exactly like you said, right? It's what you do with the luck, right? It's how many opportunities do you make to get lucky, and then what do you do when you have that lucky moment, right? Because there are a lot of times where I've seen people get that break and then sort of not follow up, or not whatever it is, just not approach it in a way that is going to be leading to more success, right? And not bouncing back from that, right? Like you said, I guess this is kind of the thing of, where I think being coming up in sort of like the DIY punk scene, because similarly, like, everybody's grumpy about everything all the time, right? So you get a thick skin. You get a thick skin pretty quick. And so, I think that's been really helpful. And also just, like DIY punk definitely does not have money, right? I think that is actually like relatively true, right? You can, there's crossover and there's money to be made, of course, but I mean, like, there's definitely, like, bands that you think are, that you think of and heard of, they're still driving around in a van, right? Like, they're right. The music industry is a lot more brutal towards creatives than the game industry, for sure. And so, I came up, eating peanut butter sandwiches, sleeping in a van, driving around, playing, the VFW hall and whatever. Right. And so this idea of grinding it out, of not immediate success, of people on the outside looking in and being like, what do you even do? Right. That energy, it's games is a cakewalk, right? Comparatively.
well, yeah. And that's another superpower that you uncovered there, right? Like, that ability to live on very little, right? To have very low overhead gives you an enormous amount more freedom and more time to do the things that you want to do, right? Like, it's a trap and a very common and difficult thing. Now, I'm not saying I want to be the guy driving around in the van. I don't know that I have that. I don't know that I have that level, but I have learned.
I'm happy I'm not anymore.
Yeah. It's glad. Yes, you get, especially as you get older, right? Like, that's another superpower that you uncovered there, right? Like, that ability to live on very little, right? To have very low overhead gives you an enormous amount more freedom and more time to do the things that you want to do, right? Like, it's a trap and a very common and difficult thing. Now, I'm not saying I want to be the guy driving around in the van. I don't know that I have that. I don't know that I have that level, but I have learned.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Yeah. It's glad. Yes, you can.
Yeah,
Especially as you get older.
I guess
right?
I should amend my statement because my days of grinding it out on the road in the game industry were very similar. I mean, they're still similar, right? I still cram as many people into rooms. Like I don't get rooms by myself, right? I'm always on an angle for like who can help me out with a room at this show. Who can the best part of it too is that like I don't have. I've never really had a. This is something we should circle back to when we change topics. But like I've never really had a boss. In that sense. So I've generally always had to sort of like scrap and, get through and figure it out and try to make it work. But something that I think is huge, building off what you said there, is the priorities that we put in our life, right? And the sacrifices that we're willing to make, the changes, the ways we're willing to live our lives, right? I don't really care about money very much, and I don't have a bunch of it, and I'm not driven by it, and and that's fine. And so I don't need money to pay for a fancy car and a big house and whatever. And I don't have kids. I don't have any interest in having kids. I mean, I think in different ways, right? Like you are very on that digital nomad life, right? And that requires, it's really great to look at it from the outside and be like, oh, it's so cool, you do all this and that, and that's amazing, and it is. But it's also like, yeah, but like a bunch of shit that's really important to the person who's looking at what you do and saying, wow, that's so amazing, I'm so envious. You're like, yeah, but like I don't have a kid, and that's like really deeply meaningful to whoever, right? And again, no value judgment, but not having kids allows someone to do a bunch of stuff that they wouldn't be able to otherwise, right? And it's a question of priorities and what you want in your life, and the sort of the way you want to spend your time on earth, right? Is a family important to me? Is going to on these extravagant vacations important to me? Is, whatever important to me. And I think mindfulness around that is the biggest thing that I run into when talking to people, especially mid-level career people, where, they're like, oh, I mean, like, I want to, do X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, yeah, but like you also, well, I only have X number of days off. I have to go, that's for vacation. And it's like, well, I mean, you could also use those days to go grind it out at a convention somewhere, right? And not saying that you need to, or that you have to, or that it's good or bad, but if you're like, yeah, well, I only have so much vacation time, I got to go to Disney, and then I got to go here and do that. I think it's a question of priorities, right?
Right. No, and now we're getting into some really deep. This is the real. No, it is. It's a real secret, I think. Particularly of midlife for most people, but throughout life, because it changes, your priorities change. But that society is going to tell you to want certain things. The entire industry of marketing is designed to make you want.
Yep.
And your job is not to judge things as right or wrong in general, but to decide which things are the priority for you. And exactly, you mentioned, and that's why I love to surface the sacrifices and the kind of underbelly of what it takes to be successful in this industry for a lot of people too, because I want people to be conscious of it, right? It's, you mentioned the digital nomad thing. I don't think I've talked about it on the podcast, but right, I'm in Medellin, Colombia, having this conversation. I last 2 years, I sold all my stuff, traveling all around the world, and I get to tell these amazing stories about what I'm doing. But also, yeah, I don't have kids, I don't have pets, I have there's a lot of discomfort and challenges that come from traveling or making sure the internet's going to work or not having the things exactly the way you want them, right? There's a lot of stuff that comes with that people don't realize, and so they just see my social media post of the cool thing that's going on, or they see my successful game launch, but they don't understand the grind that comes behind it. And so this is the stuff that you're surfacing that I think it's important, because I wouldn't trade it for the world, but it doesn't mean it's right for everybody, and it's definitely not. So people need to decide, and that I want them to have a full picture of what it takes and what the trade-offs potentially are, and then that exactly what you surface, being conscious of it. Like, what is it that's important to you? How do you define success, right? I try to have people on this podcast that are all different degrees of quote unquote successful, from the multi-billion-dollar games, right, to the just indie developer that just does stuff on the side and still has a day job. Like, all of those things can be defined as success but you have to be conscious and take ownership of defining that for yourself.
Yeah, well, so it's like taking, some of the principles of game design and applying it to life, right? I mean, one of the things that I tell students all the time, and I'm always talking about, new designers, is what is your design goal? And those goals can change. They can evolve over time. You can find the fun in a different direction than you were expecting, whatever. But at all times, you need to have a design goal, right? You need to think about what it is that you're trying to do so that you can see how well you're doing it, right? And how you can try to get there, right? And I'll put a little asterisk that, of course, there's the kind of like total just exploratory, like, I don't know, just kind of figure stuff out, that I think is an interesting and important part of the creative process. But overall, you need design goals, right? And be mindful of that. And mindful design is a thing that's really important to me. But I think that's an outgrowth of my overall kind of emphasis on mindfulness in life, right? And so we need to have design goals for our lives, right? You can apply those principles to what it is that you want to do, right? Like, what does success look like for you? What is the dream life that you want to have? What are the people whose lives you sort of aspire towards doing? And, yourself, myself, we both have lives that are, very appealing to people that are, kind of looking in from the outside. And I think, same as you, like, I wouldn't trade it for the world. I feel like the luckiest, I feel so privileged and lucky that I have the life that I have. But yeah, like, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, well, but yeah, that's because I'm meeting the goals that I've mindfully worked towards, the things that I'm doing in my life and the things that I'm doing with my career. And that there are choices. There's a lot of forks in the road, right? That you can go down, and thinking about those forks, right? You brought up marketing and sort of what we're supposed to want. And I think that's something that DIY punk in particular is just exploded for me, right? Is that very, whether it's, the degree of which it is kind of like hypocritical, corny, angry kids versus, deep philosophically things. I mean, I think there's a mix, right? but
of course, as with everything,
anti-consumerism, anti-authoritarian kind of, energy. I don't want what the mainstream wants. I'm not interested in conspicuous consumption or just the general question authority, question what it is that you want to do, be thoughtful about the things that you're doing, have those conversations, with your band, with your collaborators, your family, whatever. And, not falling into this, you hear these stories all the time about these, the people that are like they turn around and they're, 45 and like don't have, and they just look at their life and are like, what am I even doing? Like, none of this is what I want. Right.
Yeah.
And not even, and people that are quote unquote successful too. Like, I'm not saying like, the massive amount of people that are just ground down by sort of like capitalism destroying the sort of working class, but, people that you would look at on paper and be like, wow, you're really successful. You have this like, nice big house and, 2.5 kids or whatever and all that, that kind of a thing. And then they're just like, yeah, but this isn't actually the life I want. Like, this isn't interesting to me. This isn't exciting. There's things that I do like about it, right? Like, I love my kids or whatever, but that the life that people have built is not something that they mindfully pursued, right?
Yeah, and so it's that. I like the way that you put it before, and I absolutely think of things this way, right? You apply the game design process to life, and that's that sort of iterative loop. You make an explicit hypothesis or inspiration or kind of design goal of here's what I want, what I think I want, and then you create the sort of parameters that you're going to work in. You try experiments to see if you're going to get there. Then, based on how well that's going, you reflect back, test it, reflect back. Then you circle back. Okay, is that still the goal I really want? Did I achieve it in the way that I wanted? And then you reevaluate. And any step of that process can change as long as you're sort of mindfully going through it. And I want to use you can respond to that if you'd like, but I want to use this to circle back to more of your story, because I'm really interested to dig that in. That we talk about forks in the road, and you mentioned you've never had a boss, right? There must be a lot of forks.
Oh, I mean, I've had a lot of jobs. I've had lots of jobs. I've bounced around a lot. I thought I wanted to do this. I thought I wanted to do that, right? And when I say I've never had a boss, I mean more in the game industry, generally speaking, and it's definitely more of a
Right. So walk me through how you move in the game industry specifically to again.
again, connect the dots for me till you're consulting for Disney and Netflix, which for a lot of people is totally unreachable. And I don't know that I've had people worked with for Disney on the podcast. I don't think I've had anybody that worked for Netflix on the podcast. So I'm curious how you get from here to there and the lessons.
The extent of what I can talk about with Netflix is what I've already said.
Oh, well, fair enough.
Lots of NDAs on stuff.
Well, can you talk about? I totally want to dig into, because some of the stuff that's publicly out right now for Netflix. I don't know if you're able to talk about that.
I can talk about that stuff's really interesting and cool, and that I have a shared interest in some of the stuff that they're doing from the outside. I also don't want to oversell it, right? Like to be clear, I'm not like some sort of like constant, regular sort of important consultant there or anything. I've just been brought in on a few things to mostly, help people think about stuff. But
all right, well, let's again. I want to, even we can take this piecemeal. We don't have to draw draw a complete line. But I like when I say you're a creative consultant for one of these companies. How does that come about? What does the role look like? And you don't have to use Netflix if you're under NDA and you can't talk about specifically Netflix. But that type of path is not one that I've unpacked a lot on this podcast. So I think the listeners will find it really interesting.
The Netflix thing is specifically just pure luck, right? Like just right place, right time, creating an opportunity. But somebody hit me up and was like, "Hey, are you interested in this? I'm familiar with some of your stuff and whatever." And I just said yes, right?
So not luck, but you put out quality work consistently, and people thought that was interesting, and they reached out to you to work for them. Like that's like the opposite of luck to me, but okay.
No, so what I think is actually more a factor, honestly, than the work that I do is. And I'm going to sound very conceited and full of myself, and I really apologize. But I'm talking about this academically and sort of trying to be self-reflective about it. But what I talk to people a lot, and a lot of students, so I teach game design. I don't know if that's ever come up. I'm an adjunct.
Yeah, you mentioned it, and I want to unpack that too. But yeah, go ahead.
But some of the advice that I give students, advice I give on panels, advice I give to mentees, I do a lot of mentoring stuff, is work on your soft skills, right? Whatever it is that you want to do, work on your soft skills, right? Which is your interpersonal stuff, right? And ultimately, what I think a lot comes down to is, second place is somebody that could do whatever it is that the first place does, right? Like, there's not really a question, right? You brought up competitive magic, right? Top 8, anyone in the top 8 can win, right? Like, anyone in the top 8 could be the champion. There's not really a huge distinction between. It just works out, right? And so for me, a lot of my career, I think, has been, showing up, doing the work, of course, being there, like one of the first people there, one of the last people out, right? That kind of stuff. Right. Being willing to help with whatever, pitch in, but also, I think being personable, and this is the conceited bit, like, I don't know, I think, a lot of people plenty of people don't like me and my vibe, but if you like me and my vibe, like, I'm personable, right? Like, people enjoy having a beer with me, right? People you
don't have to be conceited. I could say this for you. I said at the beginning of the podcast, you're like one of my favorite people to hang out with. Like, every time we see each other, it's just
we
awesome.
Always have a blast. We
always have a blast. So I can vouch. You don't have to speak for yourself. I will speak for your personal skills and it's fun, sort of just you radiate a genuine enthusiasm and excitement and like authenticity in the things that you do, and so it's a great core.
So it's tough to put that out there as like something that you train to do, right? Because I like you said, I am genuinely just excited and interested in people, and I think a nice person overall. I think I'm very mindful. I guess we can get in real life philosophy, just being very mindful, putting out kindness in the world,
but I do think that those are trainable skills, right? So I'm sure that there are plenty of people out there that are listening. You and I are both pretty extroverted by nature, but there's plenty of people out there that are not that way by default, and that doesn't mean that you're trapped here, right? You can train yourself to be more in those circumstances, to be able to have a conversation, and it's really, really hard at first, and it's really uncomfortable at first. And, even I would have that when I would first talk to some of the people who I looked up to in game design, first had my approach to, my first conversation I had with Richard Garfield, and now we work together on projects. Like there's these moments you feel this tension, and you have to just, you train yourself over time to work through that, and then, do inner work to help you get over the things that hold you back, right? Those negative self-talk and the things that let you tell stories that, oh my God, they're all looking at me, they're all judging me. Pro tip, nobody is looking at you and judging at you 99% of the time. People are too worried about their own stuff. So if you get out of your head, you can move forward,
We can say that. I don't know, maybe you're more advanced at this than I am, but like I can say that to everyone all the time, and then but of course myself, and oh, everyone hates me, right?
No. This is all
syndrome
easier said than done. Yeah.
But so for me, a lot of it really comes from the, who do you want to work with? Who do you want to have to be on meetings with regularly? Who do you think is going to be kind of like fun or enjoyable to interact with, right? And there are other people that are unquestionably better, smarter, more talented, than me, unquestionably, right? I don't, and this isn't even me being down on myself. Just, there are people that, like, do I think I'm the best game designer in the world? Like, of course I don't, right? But it's am I the person interested in doing the thing that is the most vibing with the person that's hiring, or vibing with the person that would be collaborating.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's this combination of skills. I forget who did this quote, but so I can't give credit to it, but it's, if you want to be like successful as a contractor, there are three things, right? Do good work, do work on time, and be good to work with. If you can hit two of those, you will have a career. Like, you don't even have to do all three. Like, the fact that people are it's so rare, like that, those ability, that hard work, that work ethic, doing what you say you're going to do, being like enjoyable to be around, are as important as the quality of the work you do. Now, if you can do all three of those things, that's where you hit really, really high success levels. But it's those other pillars are just as important as quality. And so that ability to just be like, okay, cool. Like, I want to have you around. If you say you're going to do something, I know you're going to do it. You're going to be the first one in the room. You're going to be the last one to leave. Those things matter.
Yeah, and at risk of getting political, because obviously I'm not interested in politics, despite reason and everything. But we look at it in the real world, right? And George W. Bush, right? One of the major things that got talked about a lot during the election cycles he was part of was literally, well, he's a guy I'd like to have a beer with.
Sure.
Is he the smartest guy? Is he the most, whatever? And again, I don't want to go down the road of like, George Bush is stupid, all this and that, right?
Listen, if you could plausibly analyze every major presidential election by the who would you more like to get a beer with, and you would hit the right answer most of the time, like the winner most of the time. So it's not a trivial point.
And Bush is particularly interesting because you can listen to, I was working on, so I have a degree, one of my degrees is in political science, and I was in school, and one of the things that's really interesting is you can look at speeches he gave when he was the governor, and he is articulate and verbose, using a lot of kind of like higher, academic type language, like higher concept stuff, right? Then when he ran for president, he consciously, Karl Rove, the team that they were working with, consciously made a choice that he was actually going to kind of dumb himself down. Regardless of whether we want to talk about, he was a C student at Yale or whatever, like, sure. But he unequivocally saw that one of the roads to success, certainly as the time and place that he was and the base that he was going after was, well, if I'm too ivory tower, if I'm too academic, that's actually going to hurt me, right? Especially when you look at him versus Kerry, right? Kerry was so, detached, academically weird, right?
Well, yeah, and so I'm gonna veer this back a little bit towards things that are more the game design. But no, well, I had this as a problem too, personally, for a while. Like when I was younger, I really liked to prove how smart I was to people, and my conversation reflected that, and nobody likes that. Like it's a very, when you're communicating, your goal should be to add value to the people you're communicating with, or to learn, right? If that's it. And so the using, you know, a $10 word when a 50-cent word will do is not serving anybody. And I think that how you choose to communicate with people, and I think it ties back into the, you know, again, the ego and those trying to protect yourself and saying, okay, well, they can't judge me if I'm using this esoteric language. And, you know, even why I do this podcast, right? I try to deconstruct this like mythical, mysterious thing that people think like, well, how could you possibly make games? Like, you must be a genius. There's like, nope, it's very basic stuff. It's a simple process that requires consistent work and, you know, the ability to self-reflect, if I were going to put it in a nutshell. And so the ability to take those things and includes in the styles that you communicate as you're training these things, like all that stuff really matters. So I'm curious, how does this show up for you when you're teaching design?
Yeah. Well, here's a weird fork off that conversation, is that I think the best designers are the most empathetic, and that there is a very real crossover between those soft skills, you know, because that's ultimately in a lot of ways empathy. And I think that sort of mindset is a huge part of design as well. In many cases, especially, you know, when it's like sort of a one person or two person, you know, design team, that, you know, we're creating experiences, right? You said earlier. And so the ability to put yourself in other people's shoes, the ability to think about things from other perspectives, from the perspectives of people that are going to be interacting with you or with the game that you're making, I think is just a huge thing. And so, you know, I think developing that empathy is going to serve you well in everything. I mean, you're going to be a better human being, right? But if we're focused on career and design specifically, you know, really working on your empathy, really working on being interested in other people, really working on thinking about how other people think, not just the way you think. And that is going to, you know, that's great for getting hired. That's great for making the best stuff.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. Really powerful, because absolutely, like the cash value of what we do as our careers is the experiences we create in other people. And so you need to be able to predict how your actions, how the rules you create, the games you create, the things you do are going to create those experiences in others. And you need to be able to read those things too, right? The other soft skills, right? Like when I'm doing playtests, I do listen to what people tell me, but that's like 10% of the value. I want to see how are they reacting? Are they leaning forward? Are they are they talking while they're doing it? Are they looking at their phone? Are they like, you know, like the nonverbal cues and the things that you see are infinitely more valuable. And so training those skills as a designer is absolutely critical. So it's a great point. Way to segue us back to a really valuable core lesson.
Yeah, I mean, from a practical sense, right? We're talking about playtesting. The only value I get from listening to people tell me what they do and don't like is that they're more willing to play test again in the future because they feel like they're being heard. And sometimes there's an interesting insight there, but I think that that's more of a trade-off that we largely put up with. I mean, I guess that sounds more diminishing, but it's really what drives design forward with playtesting isn't so much if someone did or didn't like it, because you're an individual. You may or may not like something for reasons that have nothing to do with the design, right? I think it was Mike Selinker who had said the only question he asks is, tell me what you did. And I think that's a really, I think I ask maybe a little bit more than that, but I do think I keep it really short, and it's more observational. Like you said, observation of what's happening is by far more interesting to me than talking to people about it after. But when you ask somebody what they did, then you're getting it sort of like a filtered, really you're getting that empathy, right? Because it's not, did you like it? Did you not like it? You're like, oh, well, I was thinking about this, and so I tried this strategy. And it's like, okay, that's really interesting now, right? Now I'm getting a better, what I'm trying to do when I'm talking to somebody during playtesting is empathize with why they're making the choices they're making, why they're having the experience they're having, and not the sort of like what their perception of that experience is. It's more, what is going on in their heads that they're doing this, right?
Yeah, that's that. I think that's right, and I think there's another piece that I find valuable from sort of verbal feedback is later on in the process. I'll actually take some of the things that people say about the game and use that to craft the kind of marketing and messaging for it. Right, when people things that
Yeah,
like when the common phrases and the ways that your players describe the thing is often there's a lot of gems in there because that's how they talk and it's how you want the people like them talk, and so you want to pull pieces of that out. But that's a much later in the process thing. But something I've noticed more recently in my career there's valuable gems there. But
yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that from the marketing perspective. Yeah, that's great.
Because what you think is great about your game and how you want to describe it is not necessarily what other people think. Like this has been really driven home for me with SoulForge Fusion, the project I did recently, because it's got so much going on. Algorithmically generated cards and things are uniquely named and numbered, and you're shuffle building decks, and it scans it online, and it's got all these cards level up as you play. Like I have an infinite list of things, which in many ways is a problem because it's so much that you lose your elevator pitch, right? You can't just say something quickly and get somebody in. So you've got to know what is the thing that's going to hook this particular type of player, and then let them discover the rest over time. And so it's I often tell people like you need to pare things down, and whether that's both in true of your game design, but also in true of how you market. And I found the players, the customers, the people themselves will give you they'll tell you the answer if you're able to listen to it and get out of your own head.
Something I just thought of that I want to make a note of because I thought of it is if you're a designer, because there are a lot of designers that are very spreadsheet oriented, right? And less comfortable with the empathetic stuff. And I think you can build that, like we said, but I am a huge fan of design partnerships and collaboration. And if you are a designer and you're like, I have no idea what people think, this is insane. I mean, like, work on it. I think that you can make a concerted effort to be better at that. And it may take time and it's hard work. But don't be shy about partnering with somebody who's less spreadsheet oriented, but more empathy oriented, right? I've found some good success because I'm definitely a little bit less spreadsheet oriented. I've had to become more and more over the course of my career, but I'm definitely more of the social empathy kind of, think about people energy. And so having partners that are a little bit more design oriented or spreadsheet oriented, right? I'm going to shout out Andrea Pincume, who is works or is a partner in the studio now. We updated, so now we're a worker co-op, or we're in the process of converting. So Andrea no longer works for me. She is a partner in the studio, but her and I have hit it off super, super well over the last few years working together because she is a much more logical running, dice simulations and things like that. And our skill sets complement each other really well, right? And we know how to talk to each other. We know how to vibe with each other. We're certainly both capable in the other domains, but it's huge to have someone that complements your skill set there.
Yeah, no, I mean that's true in game design. It's true in building a company for sure. I mean it's one of the most important things. It's like kind of weird to a certain extent the first time you sort of realize this. Like there's the things that you hate doing. There's somebody else out there that loves that. Like somebody else loves that part. And if you find that person and you guys can work together, you go girls, guys, whatever, you can work together. It's magic. And so it's a really important realization. And yes, when it comes to some of the fundamentals, like we've talked a lot about communication, both empathy, your ability to communicate, spoken word, written word. I don't care what you do, you need to work on that. Like it is one of the more universal set of skills that will apply no matter what career you're in, no matter what aspect of the career you're in. However, if that sort of stuff and speaking on stage and being the person that's the front man is not appealing to you, find someone that does love that because that person is there. And vice versa, right? The spreadsheet detail person, you still need to work on spreadsheets. I don't know any game designers that don't work in spreadsheets, at least some amount, but you can certainly find the person that really, really loves them and you can, work on your skills on it over time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly working
yeah.
it's writing cards, and
yeah,
is the majority
exactly.
of my spreadsheet time.
Yeah, that's right. You don't need formulas and stuff, but yeah, that's where your card files are. That's where everything lives. I actually track my time on everything. I use an app called Rescue Time to track like how much I spend in each thing, and documents and spreadsheets by far the most things that I spend my time on. So just be prepared, everybody out there. That's the life of a game designer. My actual time spent playing games way smaller.
I think that's a really interesting thing to unpack as well, is being aware of what you do, right? So I don't track time currently, but I did for I don't know, 6 months or something. It's not really the way my mind works. My mind doesn't work in that way. I don't want to think about that stuff. That's just not interesting to me, and it's just kind of stresses me out. But I did 6 months of tracking stuff because that gave me insight into what it is that I'm doing and what it is that I'm spending my time on and how much time I'm spending. And I was able to use that data to kind of think about what it is that I want to be doing, right? And again, to help set a goal, right? Am I spending more time than I want to doing X, right? What do I want to be doing with my day-to-day career, right? And I think that's really, really useful, even if you don't want to do it over time or consistently. Just do it for 6 months and see what you're doing.
Yeah, it's important. Like, it's surfaced for me. You think you know how you spend your time, but you do not. Yep. I promise you, if you've never gone through this exercise, whoever's listening, if you've never gone through this exercise of actually time tracking, you are going to be shocked by what you find. And so for me, I realized I was spending like 3 hours a day in email. Like, 3 hours a day in email. Like, what in God's name? That's not why I'm here. That's not my biggest value add. Like, and so I really refocused. Okay, I'm going to block off certain times for emails. I'm going to make sure that I like really, cutting that part out and making sure I did carve out more time for doing design work, carve out more time for the things that did matter. And so then being conscious of, okay, what are the things that are your superpowers, right? The superpowers I define as the area that's between the I'm good at this, I enjoy this, and this is useful, right? Like, there's some center of that Venn diagram. That's your superpowers. And typically, most people, you want to focus on, 2 or 3 that you're really your superpowers, and you want to maximize your time spent in that zone. And so I realized I was not doing that. So I shifted. And so it's a very powerful tool for those out there.
Yeah. I mean, what's been really interesting for me as the studio has grown is shifting myself and accepting that biz dev is something I actually really enjoy and am pretty good at. And that if I, especially, like I said, the studio growing, we have more people, like I don't need to have creative control over everything we do, right? I can let some stuff go, and I can bring in, clients or projects or opportunities and not be the one that does it. And that's been crazy for me. But like you said, it's a thing that out of the team of us working, like, I'm pretty good at, and turns out I enjoy it because I like talking to people, and it is a great value add for the company because we can bring in a lot of stuff, and that surfaced really because of more time tracking and being really mindful and reflective of what it is that I'm doing, what it is that I'm spending my time on, what it is that I'm finding myself sort of like passionately pushing at, right? And it turns out that is a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, if you were gonna pick, so so biz dev, some people may not understand that terminology, and so part of it is some things you've already talked about, right? You go to conventions, you put yourself out there, you have conversations with people, they approach you with stuff. Is there anything else that you would say that is a key part of successful business development, biz dev?
I think approaching it, for me at least, I think there's like the kind of like, dark side of it or whatever that is just totally not interesting to me, but I don't want to pretend like that's not sometimes successful. But for me, so much of it is not approaching it like a quote unquote sales guy, right? It's someone has a problem, right? Someone needs help with something. And it's trying to figure out how we can help solve that problem for or with them, right? And a lot of really good biz dev is knowing when you should pass, or knowing when you don't have something to offer, right? It's really about that longer term relationship building. One of my favorite bits of advice for people that are pitching is my goal whenever I go into a pitch meeting is to be invited back to another one. That's it. Going in with that mindset, especially I think, you know, in the case of pitching games in the game industry, it's right place, right time. You know, people turn down incredibly successful games. There are games that go on to be incredibly successful all the time, right? And right place, right time. And you can have the best thing, and it's just that the company is like, this is amazing, but it just doesn't fit into our schedule or whatever, right? And so when you go into a sort of like business development situation, whether that's pitching or, you know, talking to a client about maybe getting hired to do, you know, a work for hire project, or, you know, we do a lot of graphic design stuff as well. You know, so things like that isn't, I need to close this sale. It's, hey, help me. I want to help identify what your issue is. I want to talk about ways that we can help you with that issue. And if it syncs up, and we like, you know, vibe together and feel like it's going to be good, then great, we're going to do it. And if it doesn't, then that's also fine. You know, it's when somebody says, no, I don't think it's going to work, like just accepting that, right? Because it might work in the future. And you got to play the long game with that stuff, right?
Yeah. No, the number of times that people, I've talked about this in the podcast before, but like somebody will pitch a game and it's be like, yeah, I don't think it's for us. And here's some things I think I would look to improve, you know, give them feedback. Then they start arguing with me. Yep. Just like it's happened so many times. Like, do not argue with people you're pitching to. That is never the right answer. Like, you may not agree with the feedback. That's totally fine. Right. But listen, take that feedback in. And if you do agree with it, great. Bring it back and adjust it and show them. People love it when you listen to them. People really think that their ideas are all great, even when they're not. So, or just that's not the fit. Move on.
So this is, I don't think I do consciously, but it is something that I'm very aware of when I think about it. Is that as soon as you give someone a little bit of ownership over a thing, they're in. Right. And
yes.
In regards to that pitching, you know, and this is not the way I approach stuff generally, but it is true that if you're pitching and somebody's like, yeah, but like, what if you try this mechanic, and you come back and have done that and like are very like draw that through line, like, hey, we had this meeting, you suggested I do this, and it works out great, you know, and it has to work out and do the thing, but like, I tried it. It's great. Look what we've done. Like your advice was invaluable. That company is, you know, exponentially more interested now in potentially doing that thing together, right? Because
it's like, and it's not from a dark side perspective. Like it's just, you know, it's a part of human nature. Like, and they feel ownership, which is true. B, you've shown you're the kind of person that listens to feedback and can not be the ego driven. Like, no, my way is the right way. Like, so they're more likely to want to work with you, right? It ties into that piece. And similarly, I would draw a through line from that to the other thing that you were talking about, which is giving up creative control to your team, right? Like that was very hard for me to do because that was just my role, right? I'm the designer. I know what's up. I'm going to do the things. And then it was only when I realized how corrosive that was, both to myself because I wasn't able to shift to other things, and then to my team because I wasn't letting them shine. I wasn't letting them do their thing, that I realized, no, actually my stepping back is way better. Let them take ownership of it, give up some of that control. And then your people are more excited. Your team is more excited. They're doing better work. And oftentimes, as hard as it is to admit, you realize, oh, you know what? Maybe their ideas were actually better than mine. And you learn and you grow.
It's interesting when we think about that stuff, right? Because, you know, like it was some corporate guy, you know, hire people that are smarter than you. Like that's
right.
Like, and, you know, if I hire somebody, I think they're really smart and talented. So, you know, what is my ego to be like, well, I know better than you. Well, like I have certain levels of experience. I have certain, you know, knowledge, things like that. But, you know, at the end of the day, I'm hiring people because I respect them and think they're talented and smart. And so if I'm trying to control every little thing all the time, like that's not actually manifesting why I would hire somebody, right? If I don't don't trust someone to do things or to be smart, or that their opinion or their take on something is really valid and worthwhile, well then, like, why did I hire them? Right.
Right.
And think that, working with people, or partnering, not necessarily even hiring, like working with someone, just collaborating with somebody, like, well, I think you're really smart. Like, I'm not collaborating with people that I think are dumber than me and like less talented. Right.
Well, let's break down this collaboration piece and this company growing piece, right? Because you've got a very interesting take. You talked about becoming a co-op, that there's no bosses in your company. But I think we both believe this, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but that, the creative process still does need, some kind of lead and arbiter in it, even though you want to, of course, listen. And so how do you navigate that? What does your company growth and structure look like to handle that?
Yeah, well, kind of bouncing around in those thoughts. A bit of advice that I got from Eric Lang a long time ago was, in the very early stages of a project, decide who is creative lead. And that way, when there are these disagreements that are both very reasonable, you can have very, very reasonable forks that you're both right. But somebody needs to make that choice, right? And so, for us, collaboratively, there is usually a kind of, okay, well, like when we need a tiebreaker, we've established who that person's going to be, right? And I'm trying to be less of that, but at the same time, structurally, I am still creative director of the studio. And as such, I frequently am kind of the final sort of word, I guess. I'm trying to do less of that. And I think that's cool, but I think there's creative process, lead, and then there's like business and everything else lead. Right. And I think that, for us, the co-op is less about, no leadership on creative work and more about a cooperative approach to decision making, and especially sort of like finances, right? That's what drives me the most in terms of the co-op model. Is I'm really not a fan of concentration of wealth, right? Of my contribution is more, and I deserve more money, and I am, that kind of stuff. I'm much more interested in kind of like worker-owned co-ops, and the people that are creating the value, sharing in that value that they've created, right? I don't think that my role is, I think my role is crucial and important, and the things I do are valuable. But it takes everybody to do that. And if I could just do it all myself, I would, right? To me, it's a lot about sort of like fairness in terms of approach, right? I'm just not interested in being this kind of like authority, kind of tell everyone what to do and keep all the money, and how little can I pay someone? Not, it's more how much can I pay someone has been the conversation a lot more than how little can I pay someone to do the job.
Sure. Yeah. So that ethos of collective benefiting from the company, and some collective decision making around some financials and challenges and direction, but you would still have and support kind of authority on creative decision making in the core projects.
And it's come back to bite me a few times, to some degree. But I think it's getting back, accepting that over the long haul, that's the life I want to live. And I am looser with co-design credit, right? I'm looser with sharing royalties. And, sometimes it has been something where in retrospect, it's like, oh, that was really kind of dumb. I guess it didn't really work, or that didn't really work out, as I'd hoped. But at the same time, so many other things have worked out explicitly because I've been very chill about that stuff. And also, at the end of the day, right, it's game design in particular, creative work, like what we do in particular, right? Like somebody can play test a thing and say 2 sentences and crack the whole thing wide open that you've been working on for a year, right?
Right.
And like what does that mean, right? There was a game that we have coming out, that theoretically coming out, I guess it's been in the hopper for a while. But, somebody that was part of our local design group, we're playtesting it, said, it's a game with like 5 rules, and said something that made, 2 of the 5 rules basically, right? Extrapolated into this thing. And I was just like, great, you're a co-designer on this now,
right.
I don't think that people should go in. The person giving that advice shouldn't go in with that attitude. I'm very big on the, what do you want out of this playtest? What do you want out of the feedback I might give you? Are you looking for collaboration? Are you looking for, what's your situation? But, for me, it was like, well, there's 5 rules. 2 of them are the result of you, having a brief conversation with me after playtesting it a couple times. And great. And then now that's a person that, I think is a really talented, awesome person. And it's exciting to see their career grow. There's Corey Mudderman. He did his studio did On Porpoise. They did Tricky Dicks recently. Just really, really smart. Over Under Ostrich. Just really smart, weird, creative people. And they were very early in their career of making games. And for me, it felt very natural to say, hey, like, you're part of this. This is great. And for them, I think it's a nice little boost, right? So. It works out great a lot of times.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and yeah, that's, I think that the key piece of there, when you're playtesting or you're giving feedback, you're involved in the design process. It's important. It's great to be explicit of who's doing what and what the roles are. Right? If you're, I playtest my friends' games all the time, and I'm happy to give free advice and rule suggestions and whatever. And I don't expect anything in return. If it's something where they want me to put in significantly more work, and I'm gonna write a design file or do something more substantive, then I'll be very explicit about the conversation. Okay, are we co-designing here? Or what you want?
Yep.
What is it that you want? So just being explicit about that stuff's important. And then, of course, if you want to feel like somebody who was just a playtester added so much value, you want to give them more. That's a great thing to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is just general business advice with, contracts and all that kind of stuff in general, is have the hardest conversations when you're in the best mood, because that hard conversation isn't only going to get much harder, right? And is this a co-design? How do the finances work? It's stuff that we do. I mean, I personally hate all of that stuff, right? Like, I hate that kind of awkwardness. I hate financial approaches. I hate all of it. But we're going to talk about that now, because I don't want to have a misunderstanding later where, like, oh God, now we have to deal with this thing or that thing, or, it's also about checking in on that stuff too. I had a conversation with a collaborator that I love and trust, and we've been doing a ton of stuff together lately. And we were talking about an upcoming project, and we were talking about some of the royalties involved and some of the money stuff. And I was just like, listen, like, this is a deal that I typically wouldn't take. It's not this particular deal. It's licensed stuff. It's whatever. And I was saying that, like, this is a lower sort of deal than we would typically go for, that we would typically, advocate for ourselves. But I'm really excited about the project. And I think it is an egalitarian financial approach, because they're not making a lot of money, right? There's a license involved, it's whatever. So, but I also felt it was really important in this conversation where, like, to be clear, 100% great. I'm super fine about it. But I felt it was important at that, when it first kind of came up, for me to bring up the fact that this is how that contextualizes in our, the way that I'm typically doing stuff, or the deals that we have right now. Because what I didn't want to have happen was a year from now, we're having a beer and, talking, and I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, that deal kind of is like kind of out there. Right. And then that person feels like, because it's someone that I know and trust and really, really like, that they might feel hurt that I, didn't bring it up, or that it might get awkward.
Yeah. Surface hard conversations early. That's just like a good rule.
rule for life, also for business, for everything, right? There's a lot of conversations you really don't want to have. You want to assess what's going on for you, right? To check in with yourself. Why do I feel this way? What's happening? And then make sure that if it's something that needs to be addressed, even if you don't want the situation changed, like the case you're talking about, right? Like, I've accepted this deal, but I want to feel heard. I want you to understand where I'm coming from here, and I want you to know that, and then you can move forward, right? And so I think that sort of stuff's really powerful. I want to, because we're getting close on time here, which makes me sad because I'm having a lot of fun in all the life
I guess
philosophy
you just have to have
discussions
me
too.
back sometime.
Yeah, that's true. I love it. Or the next time we're together, we can have this conversation over a beer.
That too.
I think so. You teach game design. We've hinted at it a couple times here, and so we've surfaced a lot of key lessons. But I'd love to just like open the floor a little bit for sort of other lessons for people that are just starting out, that are really want to kind of get their first designs done or move forward. What are some of the key lessons or any other things you'd want to impart to somebody out there that's really looking to break in and get started?
So these days I mostly teach intro to game design classes. And I really, really like it. I have two major goals when I'm doing it, and I think this is huge if you're interested in kind of breaking into game design. One is to stop thinking about games as a consumer. Is just huge. Think about games as a piece of craft, right? I think especially aspiring hobby designers have a lot of opinions about what is and isn't good. What all these things. Think about it as a piece of craft. Think about the component parts that are making up an experience. I primarily teach in digital programs or programs that are people going on to digital. So stuff I like to bring up is sound design, because that's just so specific and narrow, and can be a huge, huge factor in a game. And so think about games in that way, right? What is it about Gloomhaven that is really connecting with people, right? Oh, Gloomhaven's fun. I really like it. Yeah, I don't care, right? So thinking about games as a piece of craft, thinking about games not as a consumer, as someone who is looking at it as work, right? Is it the fact that it's a very expensive game and you have that the fancy wine effect, right? Where it's very expensive, so it must be very good, so therefore I love it, right? Is that a factor? How much of a factor is that, right? That has nothing to do with if the game is good or bad, right? Is it the graphic design? Is it the art? Is it the rules? Are the rules written really well? Is the onboarding good or bad? Is the legacy components, whatever, thinking about all the different things that go into making that game, because you're going to have to be the one that does that, right? We don't make games fully formed as a thing. We have to think about all that stuff. And then the other really big thing is trying to force people to be creative on demand. Because it's really easy to, take this kind of, I'm an artist and, I'm going to have an inspiration and, whatever. And I think that happens and that's great. And you need to be open to that and kind of create environments for yourself where that is possible. But you also need to be able to just make stuff up, right? And I don't know, maybe I should do it again this year. For years, I would do concept a day. Right. And so I personally would come up with a concept a day. Sometimes it was 2 sentences. Sometimes it ended up being 2 pages because it just became a thing. Right. Some games that I've done started as these things that I wrote in bed at 2 a.m. when I remembered I didn't come up with a design today. And then it turned out to be cool. But for every one of those, there's hundreds of bad ideas. Right. And so I made 100%. All of my students every week have to come up with 3 concepts. And I do not care if they're good. I do not, they don't get graded on if they're good or bad. They just have to have, demonstrate that they thought about it they didn't just describe Pokemon or whatever. Right.
Right. That's one of the exercises in my book too. That's just every day. All right. I actually I want 10 game concepts a day, right? That you just, and then for the higher number of forces you to get past this idea that they have to be good. Holding on to your ideas is precious. This fetishization of ideas is corrosive because you need to just get yourself in the habit of creating it. So it's great advice. And so as is the other piece, and I don't want to interrupt if you've got more, because I think I just want to highlight both because they're both great.
I think
understanding the craft of design and doing the work of design and training that creative muscle.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two biggest. I mean, the other thing is just building on that iterative, right? It's kind of building on have a bunch of ideas. It's like, well, make a bunch of stuff, right? And accept that it's not all going to be great, that it's not all going to work out. And if you're starting out, your first game is probably not going to be great, and that's fine. Your first 10 games are maybe not going to be great, and that's fine. But every time you make something, you get better at making stuff, right? I look at stuff that I put out years ago, and even things that I'm like really proud of, and especially was proud of, very proud of at the time, and still work that I'm proud of, excited about. I still am like, oh my God, I would pick that apart now. Like, oh my God, right? Like what, I just feel like I'm so much further in my career and thinking, right? And that's always going to be the case, right? Like, when is a game done? Like, well, when it ships, right?
Like, when you're out of time, when you hit the deadline.
But that's, the answer is simultaneously never and when it ships, right?
Yep. That's right. That's right.
And I mean, I think that's part of it too, is it's not that I'm not thinking focused on the work that we're doing now, but I am also thinking about whatever's next, right? And that there's going to be a next, and that whatever, this one may or may not work out, right? And not everything you do is going to be a hit. Not everything you do is going to be successful. You're going to have less successes than you do big successes, right? Generally speaking. And even people that have a really high percentage hit rate in terms of what comes out, what we're not seeing is all of the stuff that they started and we're like, well, this isn't going anywhere, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. The iteration loop, the number of times that you can get through those iteration loops is going to be way more predictive of your long-term success than how much time you spend on your prototype or any given one
exactly.
thing.
Just constantly be doing and making and pushing forward, right? And similar to like in your book, it's a lot of exercises, right? And that's I think a really important thing is just do things, right? Make a dice game. I don't care, is it good, is it bad? I don't care. Make a dice game. Here you go.
Right. No matter where you want to end up, like just making things, getting through the practice of making things, even if you want to make, AAA video games, getting through that, I always tell people to start with basic physical games, dice games, card games, whatever, because you get the iteration loops are so much faster. You learn a lot very quickly, and then you can start iterating in, even when you want to make the digital games, can you iterate in a paper prototype first? How much do you need? Can you mod an already existing game first to like test your core assumptions and like move through and iterate faster? All that stuff is just so critical. So those are great. If you picked 3 pretty phenomenal core pieces of advice here, just dropping a lot of value for anybody that sat through this whole podcast. They get the gems.
Well, since we're both very personable and smart and talented, obviously people could not turn away from this.
How could they turn away? How could you want to listen to anything else? Well, all right. So everyone that has been so impressed with how personable and smart and talented you are, and they want to find more, this hour and a half or whatever is not enough. Where do they find you? Where do they find your stuff? How do they get more Matt Fantastic?
So the studio is Forever Stoked Creative, and you can go to foreverstokedcreative.com. And that's, I don't really do social media stuff. I have an Instagram that I post mostly political anti-capitalist memes to every couple months.
Buyer beware if you want to join in on this one. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. I mean, send me an email. I'm very, I don't, it's complicated, but, I probably, would benefit from doing more of it. I got a LinkedIn, you'd be proud of this. I got a LinkedIn, like a month and a half ago. I got a LinkedIn before Unplugged this year. So, I should get a LinkedIn. That would help.
Nice. Look at you, professional person.
Well, we're moving, we didn't get into it, and it's not super relevant to a lot of these people, but we're moving into doing some more advertising type stuff, doing activations and things like that, which is
that's cool.
So LinkedIn is well, because again, it's just a problem, right? It's experiential problems, right? It's thinking, and I find that stuff really interesting because we're thinking about, ultimately we're trying to drive behavior, right? My fancy thing that I work on is motivational systems design. And so that's my $10 word for, what I do when we do some of the corporate consulting type stuff. Right.
Motivational systems design. I like that.
Yeah.
So
All right. Well, now we're going to go over because I don't want to just let that go. So this is basically what I hear. What I hear. I apologize, but I think this is what I hear from this is that you're just basically the same thing as game design, right? Where I'm trying to create experiences and create rules that drive certain behaviors in the game to craft those experiences. So you're doing this more broadly. Does that mean it's like a physical activation, like an alternate reality game thing? Does it mean it's like a what's in the scope of this motivational systems design?
So, I mean, that's something that I came up with more recently to get paid more as a consultant.
The $10 words are useful for that effect. I poo-pooed them earlier, but they do have value. Your synergistic cross hybridization strategy systems are great.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people are really interested in gamification, right? And I don't think that is actually what people are interested in. And I think a lot of people, when they think about gamification, are thinking about it in a really low, not sophisticated way. And not to say that people that are saying that are not smart or super talented or incredibly, amazing people, but just that's not actually what it is, right? We're not trying to make a game. We're creating a motivational system to drive behaviors, right? And so I just worked for a while on this product called Aro, ARO, and it is basically a box and an app for your phone to help you sort of like physical space. There's a whole bunch of psychology stuff behind it. I read a lot of books. It was actually it was a really fun thing to work on. But it's about, using your phone less, basically. And so they originally were like, well, we're interested in gamification for the app. And I was like, I don't think you actually are. I think what you're interested in is how do we make this sticky? How do we help people do the things that they want to do? Right. People come in wanting a thing and how do we do that? Right. And so for me, it wasn't making it a game. It was applying the principles that we use in game design of creating experiences and shaping behavior. And then how do we do that to get people to, especially something like that they're struggling with being on their phone too much and just that automatic response of a phone. And that's why there's this box and it's a whole thing. But how do we help people do a thing they want to do? How do we motivate those people to continue with a behavior, right? How do we get people comfortable with it? How do we help build habits? And that stuff is just super interesting to me. And it is ultimately really building on what I do as a game designer, but it's really not gamification, right? But then
I'm super passionate about this sort of stuff. Again, I'm pretty sure we could talk for another hour and a half on this, but I don't know if did I ever give you a copy of the Level Up journal that I made? Do you know anything about this?
No.
Yeah. So I basically made a little pocket handheld journal that uses these same principles to help you build better habits and have more gratitude and get things done in your life. And use, again, the simple things, you just check off boxes and earn little points for yourself, but using it to motivate you in real life. And I do work with the Wharton School of Business on helping to teams to ideate better and work together better in groups, like this sort of stuff. Yeah, all right. We're gonna have to have a part 2 because this is gonna take too long. But I think it's a fascinating, entirely different subset of the same skill and craft of what we do that I'm very passionate about also because you're taking these skills and you're directly applying them to make the world better. Like, how do people work together better in teams? How are you able to build the habits and the lifestyles that you want? How are you better able to, kind of move yourself forward to these goals that are intrinsically valuable as well as the ones that are sort of set up for the premise of your given game or experience?
Yeah, no. And to circle back to something that I said earlier, I'm just driven by stuff that I find interesting, right? Which is what a privileged, wonderful position to find myself in at this point in my career and life. But, I find this stuff fascinating and it crosses over so much. And so, my career is in a lot of ways been following what I find interesting, because then the work that I'm doing is, better work. I'm working harder because I'm just interested in it. I'm reading a bunch of books about psychology and habit building and, all this kind of stuff. And it also is making me a better person,
Right. Yeah. Studying these things has this knock-on effect of, hey, this works. Like I use my journal now and I've adopted the principles that I learned and I've helped myself be better. And so it's this
not
whole
only am I the president,
cycle.
I'm also a client, right?
Oh, that's a dated reference. I think a lot of our audience is going to get that one anymore, but I love it. All right, man. Well, there's no better way to end it, I think, than that, right? We are driven by our curiosity, the things that we're passionate about, the things we love talking about and learning more about. That's exactly what's happened today in this conversation, as it always does when we get to chat. I'm really glad we got to do this. Glad we got to share some of these insights with the audience. And I'm very much looking forward to the next time, whether that be, another chat like this or one in person over a beer. So I can't wait, man. This has been great. Thank you so much for coming on.
Like you said, I mean, I love talking to you as well, and so this has been great. And we have not seen each other as much lately for sort of obvious reasons as well as just being busy. But this is great. Thank you so much for having me. And if you made it this far listening, thank you so much for listening. And if you want to talk about this stuff, it's just Matt at foreverstokedcreative.com. I like talking to people and talking about games, and much like yourself, right? You put your phone number in Think Like a Game Designer. So, I'm of similar, I want to help people get into the industry. I want to help people grow. I want to do that. So, if you thought anything I said was insightful or helpful, hit me up.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Then I can't wait to hear what people send you, and we'll share some of those stories next time.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you want to support the podcast, please rate, comment, and share on your favorite podcast platforms, such as iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever device you're listening on. Listener reviews and shares make a huge difference and help us grow this community, and will allow me to bring more amazing guests and insights to you. I've taken the insights from these interviews, along with my 20 years of experience in the game industry, and compressed it all into a book with the same title as this podcast, Think Like a Game Designer. In it, I give step-by-step instructions on how to apply the lessons from these great designers and bring your own games to life. If you think you might be interested, you can check out the book at thinklikeagamedesigner.com or wherever fine books are sold.